Welcome back to the Boomerang podcast. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Jeff Calhoun. He's from Tactical Civics. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Good to have you.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. I had Bill Ogden on the other day, and we're kind of doing a roundabout with you guys. I think we have one more coming on. I don't know if it's David Zuniga or it might be somebody else over there.
Okay.
But you guys are doing incredible stuff, and I've the last couple months gotten familiar with your work. Tell us a little bit about kind of your view of Tactical Civics. Give us your kind of the rundown.
Well, so a year and a half ago, I was clueless about anything other than I knew things were wrong. And like everyone else, I went through 2020. I went through 2021, and I knew that the way things were happening, the arbitrary closure of businesses, essential businesses, non-essential businesses, the synchronized and strategic and coordinated marshaling of every bureaucratic force of government against the people to strip us of fundamental rights, forcing injections on people. I mean, everything. I just knew that it was all wrong. And I said, okay, there's got to be something that can be done. And I want to find out what that something is, because I know that this is not what the founders envisioned.
Intended. Yeah.
And so after chasing my tail and going down some rabbit holes of different esoteric theories and watching videos and reading things and trying to figure out how to address the problem, how to find a solution, right, I was introduced to Tactical Civics. And when I was introduced to Tactical Civics, the degree of clarity that I got was overwhelming. It was like I was in a fog, and the fog lifted, sun came out, the sky turned blue, and I was like, wow, I can actually see. And this was in the fall of 2022, and I dove in with everything that I had, committed myself to learn, to study, to read. And that's what I've done for the past year and a half. And, I happen to be a voracious reader anyway. I had enough knowledge about the way things were just because my father-in-law, my wife of 25 years, her dad was a gold bug. And he talked a lot about currency. He gave me the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, about the creation of the Federal Reserve. And so I knew that, like I had my mind wrapped around that, that of the fraud and the embezzlement and the theft that was happening through the banks. But when it came to fundamental constitutional civics, I didn't have a clue. And so I'm like a lot of people right now in Tactical Civics. I knew very little. I was frustrated, angry, and felt somewhat helpless about how in the world can we even think about confronting the tyranny that was manifesting itself daily from our federal and state palaces. And when I found Tactical Civics, I started learning what civics actually meant. I really didn't know that we, the people, are the boss, that we have the supreme authority, and that's not just wishful thinking. It's not a patriotic maxim that you put on bumper stickers. The founders actually created a system of governance that placed the people in the role of sovereignty. And maybe I should say that the other way, because this was the first Supreme Court decision that of real significance was Chisholm versus Georgia, and Chief Justice John Jay. And he made this statement. He said that at the Revolution, the sovereignty devolved onto the people. So at the Revolution, prior to that, we were British colonies, and we were under the sovereign authority it was a dual authority of the king and parliament. Well, when we declared our independence and severed ourselves from the sovereignty of Great Britain, king and parliament, John Jay said that the sovereignty devolved onto the people. It didn't devolve onto any government. It didn't devolve onto any head of state. It didn't devolve on it devolved onto the people. And then he said that the people were equal as citizens and joint tenants in the sovereignty. And so then, through our sovereign will, we did two things. First, the people in all the states drafted constitutions and created state governments through those constitutions. And in every state constitution, the people made it clear that all power is inherent in and consequently derived from the people. So all officers of government are their servants and their trustees and are at all times accountable to them. That's a fundamental principle of republicanism. We wrote that into every state constitution. And then after the Articles of Confederation kind of fell apart and the Confederation was falling apart and everything was chaos, in 1787, the people crafted a constitution. And through that constitution, we created a federal government and we are its masters. James Madison wrote something that is that I wear as a badge of honor. And it's a real simple statement. He said, the authority of constitutions over government and the sovereignty of the people over their constitutions is something that must always be kept in mind. Simple principle. Governments and all officers of government are under the authority of a constitution over which the people are sovereign. Because the first three words say, we the people do establish and ordain. And so through the Constitution, we created government. We created a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. And we're above it. And we actually stipulated to ourselves authority to enforce that law, because the Constitution is our highest law. And our servants are obliged to obey that law. And we have the authority to enforce it. And so tactical civics, Matt, has completely, and I mean entirely, reoriented my whole heading and bearing in life. I mean, I think differently, see differently. Everything is different.
Yeah, because we can fight back. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, well, and and the great thing is not just, we don't have to fight because our founders did the fighting. Like they fought back against a tyrannical government. They shed blood. They lost homes and possessions. They sacrificed a great deal. They resisted, and then they led an armed rebellion. We can check those two things off the list. Now, our job is in tactical civics, we identify, kind of three things. Our first job is repentance. And that's a word you don't hear very much, but it's one that I had to own up to. And this is something that is core to our, 4 pillars of tactical civics. And that is a big part of the reason that we're in the shape that we're in right now is because America, for the last several generations, we have determined that God is not necessary. We don't need the wisdom of God, the presence of God, the providence of God. And so we've just done things our own way. And as a result, God has just said, okay, you can have your way. And this is what we've got. What we have right now is what happens when people are in charge and we put man on the throne and we take God and set him aside. And so I had to own up. And look, I've spent the last 20 years working in the local church. But I had to own up in 2022 when I discovered tactical civics that pretty much I've been content to enjoy my nice things and a comfortable life and not concern myself at all with the problems of government or governing and attempting to discover or learn or understand anything that I can do to be a part of the solution for, it was almost like, and you could probably relate to this. It's almost like corruption in government had become a late night punchline. It's kind of like, oh yeah, they're all crooked, and
Yeah, they're
and
all that's everybody just chalks it up to, oh, that's just the way it is.
that's
It's
just
like
the way it is. Yeah,
it's like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Everybody
right.
just
Yeah,
it's what he predicted in that book.
it is absolutely to the T. People talk about Orwell and 1980, but man, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World has so
He
many
inspired
elements.
Orwell.
What's that?
Huxley inspired Orwell to write
Yeah, yeah,
1984.
yeah, you're right. You're right. So he called it, and there's so much. He was eerily prophetic in where we are right now. Um, so yeah, tactical civics has been a part of that. That discovery. First of all, just of personally, and this is really is an individual thing. One of the Marxist tenets is that groups are responsible for oppression. The Christian philosophy is that no, individuals are. Individuals are the locus of change, and individuals are where responsibility rests. And so people at an individual level have to either recognize or not. And I just recognize. I said, God, I'm sorry that I was more concerned with a comfortable life than I was a life of calling. And that's ironic because I worked in a local church, but I was in my God box, in my Jesus box, doing stuff you do in a Jesus box. But I really wasn't thinking about culture at large,
Right.
and the relevance of political economy within social economy. And so my eyes have been opened. And my first step was to say, God, I'm sorry I didn't consider it to be important enough. So I'll do whatever's necessary. So now that that I'm now a spokesman for Tactical Civics. I'm one of the co-founders. Been brought into that group of co-founders of Tactical Civics, and it feels like everything that has happened to me up to this point has prepared me for this work. And I've burned the ships. I mean, this is it. I feel like this really is the pathway. It's peaceful. And I got off on this just saying that the founders did the fighting and the resisting and the rebelling. We have to repent and then restore. And that's what our work is. What we can do, we can achieve bringing our elected servants to heal, making them accountable without shedding a drop of blood. We have a very peaceful, constitutional, lawful, long-term, full spectrum plan to accomplish that. And a big part of it is waking up Americans and educating Americans on what our authority is as the sovereign in America, in our system of government. We're ignorant. We don't know what it is. We don't know what mechanisms we have at our disposal to take action. And so we're trying to educate people, organize them, educate them. And then when we reach a certain point, we'll activate them. And we'll activate all of our chapters to begin our next step of restoring law enforcement, the rule of law, most particularly enforcing our Constitution, because that's our job and we've not done it. And that's
Right.
why Washington, D.C. is run by organized crime, is because we've let them get by with it, and criminals tend not to arrest themselves. And so that's job one of Tactical Civics, is to restore law enforcement.
Right. Yeah, I had Sheila Holm on the show the other day, and what you said about, hey, you didn't really, you were kind of in your Jesus box, and the way she kind of put it, and I thought it was so perfectly put, was that we're the silent majority because we've never really been having these conversations. I mean, one of you sat down at Thanksgiving and really had any of these conversations over there. It's really only since Trump came into office that we started talking about this stuff, right? So that awareness, these conversations are only happening in the last couple of years, right? So it's starting to affect people like you, people like me, people like Bill, right? we're
Yeah,
starting to have these conversations.
yeah, we're just people that have been living our lives. Maybe we hold conservative views, traditional views, uh, uh, have a real faith, but we've allowed ourselves to be deluded into thinking that the only path of action that we can take to make a difference in the nature and operation of government is either in the voting booth or in the courtroom. So we've been conditioned, we've been brainwashed to
Right.
think that we sit in the stands, we paint our faces red or blue, we cheer on our political celebrities or heroes or whatever we want to call them, and then we try to get people excited to go out and vote for whoever we think can make a difference, can appoint the right Supreme Court justices, or can protect our liberties. So we've believed that we've had that, or if things really go bad, then hopefully somebody can lawyer up and sue the government for violating our rights. And beyond that, we have been completely ignorant of what we can do.
My
What
friend put
we
it to me great, is that we've been so focused on winning the presidency, right? If we win the presidency, then we win. And it's like, while we've been doing that, these communists have gone to the local levels and taken over down to the most local district you could find, and they put the focus on that. So whoever we got as president never really mattered. We needed to do what they were doing, which is get to the local levels.
Yeah. Well, we call Washington, D.C. a criminogenic system
Yes.
because it reproduces itself in its daily violations of our highest law. Because Washington, D.C. is daily violating the Constitution, and it reproduces itself in the states and through the states and the carbon copy cloned agencies in the states that look like and operate just like the federal agencies. Through those agencies where money flows, so it all flows downhill into our counties and municipalities. And so our counties and municipalities are getting money that is originating at the federal level, coming down through the state agencies. And all that money has strings tied to it. And so DC just reproduces its criminal system.
Right.
And we've been and it's frustrating because you still see people getting sucked into political theater.
Right.
And getting worked up about who's going to be elected and who's going to be. Well, what we've realized is that people have lost confidence in elections, and who we're electing is not the problem.
Right.
The problem is that our Constitution, both federal and in our states, is not being enforced.
Right.
We're letting them just run a criminal money laundering, fraud, embezzlement. We're just allowing them to run a full-scale
Sick.
criminal operation,
It's
and we're not
incestuous.
doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And we're the only ones who can. Like we're it. We stipulate to ourselves the authority to do that. And so, so in tactical civics, this is what we're teaching people is a return to our primordial institutions of law enforcement that used to be bedrock in both our pre-revolutionary era, during the revolutionary era, and then in our founding and constitutional era. The grand jury was number one. The grand jury, the power of grand jury, we are
It's
like
incredible.
this has been this is like finding out, when you're a kid and, and some other kid's harassing you, that you have an uncle that's a heavyweight boxing champ that you didn't know was in the family. And it's like, and and he lives across town. What? It's like,
Yeah.
wait, what? I've got an uncle that's a heavyweight yeah, we just didn't. Yeah, no. Well, and then you're going to your friend, you're saying, hey, buddy, my uncle is the heavyweight boxing champ of the world. And you give me any more beef, and he's going to come over here. It's kind of like that realization that grand jury has that kind of punch. It has that kind of gravity, of authority. And we have utterly lost all of our understanding about what grand jury actually is. And I'm telling you what, Matt,
Gets me excited. It gets
in
me
our
very excited.
listen to this. Just to give you an idea of how the founding generation, uh, how they looked at it. Like when you talked about grand jury, what came to mind? How did they see it? So our Constitution and our constitutional republic that's built on a system called popular constitutionalism, which is a phrase that was or a moniker that was coined by Larry Kramer, who was a former dean of Stanford School of Law, taught at University of Chicago School of Law, clerked for Justice William Brennan. And he wrote a book called The People Themselves. And he makes an argument in the book that is brilliantly laid out that the final word on the constitutionality of any act of Congress rests with the people themselves, not the Supreme Court. And that we should, in fact, repudiate justices that would suggest that it's they and not we
Right.
who hold the authority to determine whether an act of Congress is constitutional or not.
Jury of your peers.
And so grand jury is the founders understood this at a deep level because they were brought up with an understanding of the authority of the people to stand as a bulwark against the tyranny and tyrannical overreach of authoritarian government. Because they did it. They actually did it. And here's, some of the kind of recent examples of that. So this was in 1681. There was a grand jury in England, and we're a common law system. The American the U.S. Constitution is the pinnacle of the evolution of English common law, and that began in 1014 with the Dooms of Ethelred. And you see it developing through, things like the Magna Carta and the Charter of Liberties and the Grand Remonstrance and on and on.
Right.
And until you get to our sovereign states that identified some as republics, and then our federal republic that was created in 1787. All of that was an evolution of English common law. And so this idea of the function of grand jury was a bedrock part of that. So 1681, it was a grand jury, King Charles had demanded and pressured a grand jury to indict Lord Shaftesbury. So here's the king of England, King Charles, is putting intense pressure on a county grand jury to indict Lord Shaftesbury, and they refused. And he was livid, and he came at them aggressively with threats. They continued to refuse that indictment. And so the Englishmen looked at that grand jury system with almost a holy reverence, because we're just
Stop the
talking
king.
of people, citizens, neighbors. men of the community that stood up to the king and refused. Now listen to this. So this is 1700s, 18th century. Thomas Erskine was a Scottish jurist and historian, and he delivered a speech in 1784. And it was in defense of the dean at St. Asaph. And listen to what he said. And he said this in the presence of judges of the king's bench. He said, if a man were to commit a capital offense in the face of all the judges on the king's bench, their united authority could not put him upon his trial. They could tie no complaint against him, even upon the records of the Supreme Criminal Court, but they could only commit him for safe custody, which is equally competent to every common justice of the peace. And then he said, the grand jury alone could arraign him, and in their discretion might likewise finally discharge him by throwing out the bill with the names of all your lordships as witnesses on the back of it. So this guy is giving a speech in front of justices of the king's bench. And he said, an Englishman could come in here and commit a capital offense in your presence, and you could not commit him to his trial. All that you could do, all that you have the authority to do, is give him safe passage, which any competent judge in the land could do, to have his case brought before a grand jury. And the grand jury alone could arraign him, or they could decide to discharge him. And every one of you would have to sign the back of their ignoramus refusal to issue
innocent until proven guilty was born.
And so they understood the authority of grand jury. And then you see it in the Revolutionary era. Began with the Stamp Act. So the Stamp Act resistors, the king's imperial justices and imperial prosecutors, were actively pursuing the arrest, and charging and trying and convicting and imprisoning the resistors in the Stamp Act. Well, the county grand juries in the colonies, so they're English colonies, the grand juries refused to issue bills of indictment. It didn't matter that they may have technically broken a law, because the grand juries were the final word on the law. And they could say, you know what, the law that they broke is an unjust law. And so we're not going to indict them for refusing to obey a law that has no business being implemented. So the grand juries did that. After a time, and this was happening repeatedly. It was happening in New York. It was happening in Massachusetts. It was happening in different colonies where the county grand juries were refusing the imperial court, the imperial justices, imperial prosecutors' attempts to arrest, charge, try, convict, and imprison the protesters. The Boston Tea Party, same thing. There was one Boston act of resistance where they took tea out in the middle of a field and set it on fire. Well, the imperial justices were arrested them and were seeking to try them and charge them. The grand juries refused to indict, even though they had technically broken a law. But the grand jury said, no, the government has gone off the rails. It's acting tyrannically, and we're going to protect those who are resisting the tyrannical acts of the government. And so we refuse to indict. So then what did the crown do? They spun up admiralty courts, which were juryless courts, where they could arrest and try and imprison someone without a jury, just by executive fiat through the imperial justices and the imperial prosecutors. Well, John Hancock in 1769, and this is, you can't make this up. John Hancock is sitting in an Admiralty jail in 1769. You know, the John Hancock, whose John Hancock was on
Yeah.
the Declaration of Independence,
Declaration of
whose
Independence. Yeah.
name became, the equivalent of signature. He's sitting in an Admiralty jail in 1769. The grand jury of Suffolk County convened, initiated an investigation against the Crown's chief witness. And that grand jury determined that there was probable cause to show that the Crown's chief witness had perjured himself. And so they indicted the Crown's chief witness for perjury. That guy, realizing that the real power right there in that moment was resting with the grand jury and not with the imperial justice and the imperial prosecutor, he flees the county. So the Crown doesn't have a witness now against John Hancock, and they have to leave. And so time after time after time after time after time, grand juries in the colonies, understanding their oath, understanding that they were independent of the courts, of the judges, of the prosecutors, that they were a body of the people, standing in advocacy for the people, and that the burden was entirely on the government to demonstrate their case. They understood that they were independent. They also understood that they had authority, just like in the John Hancock case. They had authority independent of the prosecutor or the justice's decision or discretion. They made a demand that an investigation be initiated, and they were impaneled and convened, and they conducted an investigation. That same authority still exists today for grand juries. We just don't know it. We have the authority to pursue investigations and to obligate our courts to impanel a grand jury in order to investigate. And Justice Scalia in 1992, in the it's a case called U.S. versus Williams, he lays out this whole history and tradition of grand jury. And one of the things that he points out is that the grand jury can initiate an investigation of their own will merely for the suspicion that a law is being criminally violated. So all they have to have is a suspicion. They don't have to have evidence. They don't have to have affidavits. They don't have to have an arrest or somebody caught in it. No, if they just have a suspicion that a law is being criminally violated, even if it's a judge that they suspect, or a prosecutor, or a mayor, or a sheriff, or a senator, state senator, or state legislature, or if they have a suspicion that a law is being criminally violated, the grand jury has the authority to initiate an investigation, and the court is obligated to fulfill any request that they make, short of abrogating the constitutional rights of a citizen. That's the only thing they can't do. But then Scalia said that they also have the authority to initiate an investigation merely for the assurance that a law is not being violated. So it doesn't even have to rise to the level of a suspicion that there's a law being violated. They may just want the assurance that one is not, because there's so much chatter going on in the community that something corrupt is going on in our local government. Well, that grand jury in that county has the authority to initiate an investigation.
Sort it out. Right.
And if they're engaged in an investigation, then the demand can be made on the court, on the county judge, to impanel a new grand jury to pursue that investigation. So we have that authority, we have that independence, and then we have a scope of inquiry that there's virtually nothing. There's no target. There's no person that can't be made a target of a grand jury investigation. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who you are. A
You know what
grand
comes to
jury
mind? You know what
can
comes to
make
mind is yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, I'm just saying, grand jury can make any person that falls under those two categories of suspicion or just assurance the target of an investigation.
Right. You know what comes to mind to me is like Tina Peters, for example, right? So if they found her guilty for whatever reason in her bogus case that they're trying to bring against her in July, right? They pushed it back from, I think, February. Maybe maybe at that point, maybe we impanel the grand jury to investigate the very people that are trying to put her in jail. Is that how this works?
Yeah, and so when I hear stories like that, Matt, and of course uh, the list is quite long. Uh, that goes all the way to the top,
Oh
right?
yeah.
It goes all the way up and comes all the way down of violations of law that uh, have been committed by our elected servants. And there's a long list. And every time I hear of a story or an example, and it can be something as I mean, you can look back at when governors and mayors were making executive decrees and shuttering businesses. Well, that was just a plain violation of the Constitution. It was an abrogation of rights under the color of law. That we've fallen into this belief that because someone holds an executive office, that they can make executive decrees that are binding on everyone, and that through their executive decrees, they can make determinations on what you have a right and don't have a right to do. No, they can't. And just because we let them, and just because they get by with it, doesn't make it legal. And so when I hear a case like Tina Peters, of someone that is being railroaded by corrupt servants, if tactical civics, so we have a full spectrum plan for how to respond to cases like that. Look, we can't just go gather up a dozen or 25 people and say, hey, we're going to be a grand jury and we're going to
Right.
investigate. Can't do
Right.
that. Tactical civics has a very clearly laid out plan that once we build our county chapters to a target number, that will be a pretty irresistible force in that county. Uh, and once we reach that target in multiple counties in multiple states, we're going to all move in sync to pursue passage of our grand jury ordinance. And our grand jury ordinance obligates the county government to abide by certain stipulations related to grand jury. And all those stipulations return the authority and the independence and the scope of inquiry back to the people. And so, in a situation where there's a person in our community that's being targeted by the government and they're just doing what they do, which is just, ride herd over top of one of our fellow citizens. And if that happened in a county where we had an active tactical civics chapter who had successfully implemented and achieved passage of our model grand jury ordinance, then here's what would happen. First of all, there would be a roster of citizens in the community that would exist by virtue of a button where people could go and volunteer to serve on grand jury. Hundreds in your community that are patriots, that are educated, that know their authority, know their independence. And they've gone on and they've filled out a form, and we obligate the county clerk in that county to maintain a standby roster for grand jury service that gets added as an aggregate to the existing roster for grand jury service. So that's an obligation we put on the county government to maintain that roster, to gather those names of people that are volunteering to serve, and to add it to the existing roster. The second thing is that we create a pathway for people in the community to submit complaints of suspicion of criminal violations of the law. And they can do that anonymously. So imagine a city worker or a county worker that works in a county government or a municipality, and they know that there's corruption going on, but they've been working there for 20 years. And I mean, are they going to lift their head above the line of fire and torpedo their career and suffer the chance of punishment
Fired,
and
right.
getting fired and all of those? Well, probably not. They're probably not going to. But can they submit a complaint anonymously and say, I know that I know that I know that this is going on and this is who's doing it? Oh, really? Well, one complaint is not going to trigger anything. 10 complaints is not going to trigger anything. But per our ordinance, if 0.5%, if a number of complaints around any one issue equal to or greater than 0.5% of the ballots cast in the last election, if those are brought before either the foreman of a sitting grand jury or before the county judge, then our ordinance requires, and this is a pre-constitutional requirement. We're just restoring it. Like, this should already be the way things operate for constitutional grand jury.
We know the story there, right? We've diverged from the way things were, right?
Yeah, but so we're restoring it. So if a number of complaints are submitted that equal to 0.5% of the ballots cast in the last election, then the judge is obligated to impanel a grand jury. It's not.
And in the grand jury.
Then the grand jury takes that and they initiate an investigation around that issue. So that could be, there's a corrupt prosecutor that's taking kickbacks from whoever to avoid prosecution. There are certain people that are avoiding prosecution, and the prosecutor is actively engaging in a pay to play kind of thing, where they're getting kickbacks to not pursue prosecution, to settle without a grand jury investigation, without indictments. And so that would be corruption. I mean, and it could be something as simple as, and I guarantee you this happens all over America, in counties all over America. A county receives a $2 million grant from the state, which is the result of a $5 million grant from the federal government, right?
Right.
That's how it changed.
Money flowing downstream, right?
So the county receives a $2 million grant to build some public installation in their county. And just so happens
high-speed train.
What's that?
A high-speed train in California.
High-speed train, yeah, if you're out in California. And it just so happens that within that grant, there's a $150,000 landscaping gig, right? And it just so happens that one of the county commissioner's brother-in-law has a landscaping business, and he gets the contract. He gets a no-bid contract to do that job. But what nobody knows is that there's actually a clause in there that requires a minimum of 3 bids. Has anyone ever heard of a county impaneling a grand jury to investigate the award of a no-bid contract to a relative of a county commissioner?
It's taken on the chin and just accept it for the way it is.
It's just way that's a day at the office, man. It's the way. That's how we do business, and that's how we get all that money. And so, we're getting all that money, and a lot of people are being hired. So they don't do the bid deal, because we don't want some out of town company coming in and getting that gig, and so we'd like to keep it all in the house. So no harm, no foul. Well, no, actually, we want to stop that nonsense, because
there's certain. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just because ultimately we're the ones on the hook for it. We're the ones paying for it.
Right. Are there certain positions that we should be focusing on first? For example, the sheriff. To my understanding, the sheriff is the most important position locally.
Well,
we have a clown out here in Maricopa County. Should he be? Is there a set of priority positions that tactical civics is
no,
looking at?
there aren't priority positions because what we have to, and this is what we're teaching people, what we have to get in our head is that the most important position in government, in any community, any county, any city, any state, and in our republic, the most important position in government is the people working in collectively in duty-bound commitment to uh, enforce our highest law. We are the most important office in government. We're the highest office in government. And we've been, the boss left the building. You probably heard Bill talk about, when the teacher goes out of the room, if the teacher stays out of the room long enough, what happens in the classroom? It descends into chaos.
Yeah, kids go
And
crazy.
it's kind of like at work. If when the boss goes on vacation, what happens?
Productivity goes down.
Productivity goes down. Everybody starts slacking. Everybody, and they might even take $1 or 2 from petty cash and pay it back, or whatever. When the person who bears the greatest responsibility for seeing that things are done the right way, and that's the owner. So the owner is always the one that where the buck stops and where the chips fall. And a poor owner neglects his operation and doesn't pay attention to it, and it doesn't last very long. A good owner is not going to let the employees tell him how to run the company. A good owner is not going to allow employees to just arbitrarily spend massive amounts of the owner's money on things that have nothing to do with the
Bottom line.
mission and and focus of the company. Have nothing to do with it.
Right.
A good owner is not gonna allow that to happen. And if the employees started doing crazy stuff like that, a good owner is not going to protest out in front of his own business.
Right. Right.
Saying, my employees need to stop doing what they're doing. No, a good owner is going to fire them. A good owner is going to have them arrested if they're committing crimes and using his money to do it. If they're embezzling his money, if they're stealing his money under the table and he wasn't aware of it, he's going to call them all to account and he's going to restore order. And so when we look at how we're supposed to function in America, we have to start thinking like the boss. Like we have to start thinking like the ones who are in charge. Now, look, the founders didn't make it easy for the sovereign, which is the people, collectively, not individually. We're not individually sovereigns, who can go and, assert. We're collectively the sovereign. And that was that first Supreme Court case that said we are joint tenants in the sovereignty. So we do this together or we don't do it. We have to start thinking like the ones who are in charge, who occupy the highest office. The founders made it really hard for us to operate in our sovereignty on purpose. They hated the idea of democracy. We're not a democracy. I get so sick of hearing all the talking heads talk about a threat to our democracy or talk about our great democracy. We're not a democracy. The founders hated that word and never used it once in the founding generation. Did they ever use the word democracy or democratic to describe what we were, what sort of government we created?
Right.
Never. And so they made it difficult for the people to take action. But we do have institutions, and the founders understood this. We had two primordial institutions that were of the people. They were bodies of the people. They weren't representatives of the people. They were the people themselves operating in their sovereign authority. And that was the grand jury system, and then the lawful constitutional militia. we've allowed our federal government to turn the word of militia into a byword, into a bad word, into something dishonorable and something evil and something.
It's like as if you're ISIS, like you're trying to start, ISIS or,
Yeah,
you're the Taliban, right?
yeah. And militia, to be a part of your county's militia in the constitutional era, was a thing of honor. And it was also a thing of authority, because the Constitution says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, that militia executes the laws of the Union. That's one of the jobs of militia, in addition to suppressing insurrections and repelling invasions. But their first job on that list is to execute the laws of the Union. So there's a great example of us kind of doing this in 1898. So we're barely a decade into our new constitutional system of government. And John Adams, who was he was a Federalist with a capital F. He really believed in concentrating power in the executive. And along with the judiciary, they implemented these 4 acts called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Well, the people knew that those acts were unconstitutional, and they began to be vocal and aggressively resistant of these, what were called lawless acts and unconstitutional acts and repugnant acts. Well, who was a part of the leadership of that response to these lawless acts of Congress and of the executive?
Militia.
Virginia county militia regiments, Kentucky county militia regiments posted public notices and sent public notices to New York, to the federal building there, to Congress and to President Adams, and said, because here's what Adams was doing. He was having newspaper editors arrested for writing negatively and in opposition to his policies, particularly the Alien and Sedition policies.
Wow.
But we're arresting newspaper editors. They were arresting and deporting resident aliens in a time of peace without probable cause or due process. And so Virginia regiment, Madison County, Kentucky, over in central Kentucky, sent public notices to Adams, to Congress, and they said quite simply, we refuse to enforce these lawless acts that are on their face repugnant to the Constitution. Therefore, we declare them null and void. That was the militia that belonged to the states, that were bodies of the people at arms. Madison wrote about that in Federalist 46, about the people at arms. It was the yeomanry of America, armed and connected to what? A subordinate government. So the militias were connected to their subordinate government through organizing. That's what well-regulated means. Organizing, appointing officers, training and equipping. Okay. Just like the volunteer fire departments in Western Kentucky. We got them all over the place in Western Kentucky. They're our neighbors, our friends, our relatives, church members, people we go to work with that have volunteered to serve. They've been resourced and equipped, trained. They've had a command structure to respond to an emergency should one happen. Well, that's kind of first job of the militia, is that they're connected to the elected magistrate. They organize, they appoint officers nominated by the people themselves, the militia members themselves. They're trained. And in our Constitution, we gave Congress the authority to establish a uniform discipline for militia. And so the states are obligated to train and discipline the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. But they operate as the first level of constitutional enforcement. And so we see that happening with the Virginia and Kentucky militia, who were heroes of the people because they refused to enforce lawless acts of Congress. They understood that they weren't the servants of Congress, that Congress was the servants of the people. And as such, when they violate the terms of our trust, then they have to answer. They have to be held to account.
Right.
And everyone understood that in the early generations of our republic. And now we've forgotten it. And so right now, Matt, it is the ignorance of the American people that is our greatest threat right now. And
100% agree with that.
that's our focus. Our focus is calling people first
Education.
to repent of choosing comfort over calling and to roll their sleeves up and get engaged in doing the work requisite to keeping a republic, and then to start learning and start educating yourself and understand what it means to be a part of the sovereign of our republic. And that's it. It's, our ignorance is our biggest enemy. And that's what our first course of action right now in tactical civics. This is all that we're focused on, is gathering people and educating them and making sure that people understand what our authority is to enforce the Constitution. And that's it. We're not interested in elections. We're not interested in long drawn out, legislative or constitutional processes. The only process that we're focused on, because this is the key problem that we've diagnosed, is that there's no enforcement of the Constitution, is educating people about our duty and authority to enforce our highest law, and then how to act on that authority and actually implement real enforcement and hold our servants to account. Once we do that, once we begin operating in our authority, in our stipulated authority, once we restore grand jury and we restore lawful constitutional militia, not private gun clubs, not, paramilitary groups, we're talking about citizens volunteering to serve who are ordered, officered, trained and equipped and disciplined to serve in their law enforcement capacity. Because we have to have that. Because if it's a judge, if it's a sheriff, if it's, are all the sheriff's deputies going to arrest the sheriff if the grand jury issues an indictment? Probably not.
Right.
Are the city police going to arrest the mayor or the Commonwealth's attorney or the district attorney? Are they, if the county grand jury issues an indictment? Probably not. But will the people, organized and established lawfully to enforce the law, bear the sword on behalf of the grand jury, are they going to arrest him? You better believe they will.
Absolutely. Decentralization, natural decentralization.
Yeah, that is entirely, squarely at the center of our constitutional tradition. The people operating in those law enforcement functions is the bedrock of who we are and how we got here and how we return to our roots as a constitutional system of popular sovereignty.
That's incredible information. Incredible stuff. I could talk to you, Jeff, for hours, man. I have a dinner date in about 20 minutes. And if I don't make it, my girlfriend's going to kill me. Where can people find you?
Well, first of all, what I encourage people to do is if you've heard anything that has resonated with you, if you're tired of complaining and you're tired of going through the spin cycle of grievances that we've all heard before, we all know there's a problem. We don't have to keep talking about it. We don't have to keep laying it out for everyone to see over and over. It's time for action. If anything that I've said has resonated with you, then I just ask you to simply look in your heart and ask yourself, have I been content to sit in the stands and yell at the coach and complain and, and have I just been content to do that and nothing else? Will I stop complaining and start doing and get really honest? If that's you, you're ready to actually do something and to commit yourself to doing something, then please go to tacticalcivics.com. All one word, tacticalcivics.com. And there's a red button there. There's a video that I created to explain our mission in about 13 minutes. If you really want to get a refresher on the things that I've talked about, I really lay out the key points of what we're trying to do, what our mission and our strategy is and our focus and why we're doing what we're doing. Watch that video and then click the join button. It costs you $5 a month. Look, I'm not getting paid a penny. Nobody's doing this for money. I've burned the ships and have committed my life till the day I die to hand my grandchildren a republic that operates by the rule of law and is a protector and a guardian of liberty. Because that's the most precious gift we have, is the gift of liberty. And so if that resonates with you, go to tacticalcivics.com, click the red button and join us. You can join for either $5 a month or $50 a year. You can go on $5 a month and download every resource we've got. Every book that we've got is available there in PDF form. Every podcast, every link to every video. I'm doing interviews with guys like Matt all the time. You can grab those and watch those. You can kick the tires for a month and decide, is this something that, that I can really, lock arms with? Is it something that is above board? It's no crazy theories. It's no, we don't have any secret formulas. It's all laid bare. It's all hiding in plain sight. We've got the institutions of grand jury and militia that belong to the people, and no one can take that away from us. Even though we let them, we can return them and restore them. And then representation. We've got a long-range project of restoring representation in America because we don't have it anymore. We've allowed Congress to take it out of our hands. We've got average ratio of one representative for every 750,000 people. The founders will be going, what? Are you kidding me? Because the founders had a vision to set a cap on the size of representative districts at 50,000. That was their vision in the original First Amendment. And that is still sitting as a pending amendment. It fell one short of being initially ratified. But guess what? It can still be ratified. And if it is, then guess what we get to do? We get to restore representation. The 31,000 small towns in America, spread out all over the heartland, are actually going to have a real voice in our political economy. And then we get to take the next step in our strategic plan and bring Congress home and make them work full-time from their local districts, and our senators to work full-time from their state capital, where we can watch them, where we can oversee them, and where we can restore and turn everything right side up, where the people are back in charge, where we belong, not in some kind of mob rule, but lawfully and constitutionally operating in our sovereign capacity. That's our long-range plan. If that excites you, if that makes you, if your ears perk up like mine did and go, this is actually a real solution that people can actively get involved in and learn how to operate. It's long range. Look, and this, Matt, the moneyed interests and big industry, they played the long game. You think the Federal Reserve Act happened on the turn of on a dime? No,
Years.
they were playing the long game. They had a long range plan and strategy in order to get us where we are right now? Well, we've got to commit to a long range plan. And that's what Tactical Civics has. We have a long range, long term, full spectrum solution to restore things and return the authority back to the people where it belongs. So go on your date, Matt.
Absolutely incredible. And I got a little gift for you, as a reminder to see how ridiculous things got. But here, we're gonna send it to you.
Oh, that's awesome! Yes.
Congratulations, you won. For restoring the Republic, you won a Dylan Mulvaney doll.
Absolutely. I'll display it with pride.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Tactical Civics, folks. Get on there, make a donation, and don't do $5. Do as much as you can, and
Yes.
just get
It's
involved.
just a membership fee. It's just a membership fee. You just
Yeah,
pay it
whatever
and then
people
you're
can do.
in, and you're, we're a private member Christian organization, and so membership is important. It lets us know you've got skin in the game. So come and join us.
Thank you, Jeff. Hey, we salute you, buddy. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for making a platform where we can have these conversations.
Absolutely. Anytime. We'll do it again soon.
All right. I'm gonna hold you to it.
Yeah. Thank you, bud. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks.
We'll see you. Thanks.